Hello, my name is TSHIDI MADIA from EWN's politics team. So, of course, I want to speak about the latest spat in the government of national unity, but I kind of wanted to wait it out a little bit. I wanted to wait for the ANC's National Working Committee to meet. It met on Monday, so I'm going to try and give it a go today. So yeah, we've had yet another rocky patch in the world of GNU coalition politics. But I think what's clear now as the dust settles this time around is that this is not the end of the agreement yet. You are not seeing a DA walking out of the GNU, despite, of course, its endless red lines and threats to walk away from the GNU. It remains very much a part of a fractured GNU, but still in the GNU. And on the ANC's part, despite its caucus, its NEC members wanting to boot out the DA, that's also not about to happen. I think the ANC attempted to delay the sitting of an NEC. So when tempers are quite high, if you pay attention, the ANC avoids having an NEC at all cost. And part of that is to try and make sure that a decision to boot out the DA doesn't actually take place. So there are people working, I think, at all times on either side to try and keep the parties in the GNU. Some in the ANC will tell you that there's nothing wrong with the GNU, minus this one political party that they're dealing with, of course, in reference to the DA. How did we get here? This time it's about the firing of Andrew Whitfield as one of the deputy ministers at Trade, Industry and Competition. It's over a US trip he undertook with his political party, the DA, back in March. So there's a question around timing, but I'll get to that. Whitfield had asked the president for permission to travel. It wasn't granted. He then went on leave and still traveled, thus defying the president. It's seen as insubordination by I think across the board. The rules, as I understand it, is that you do need the president's permission, even if it is private travel, when you serve under him in his government, and he kind of sort of didn't. So on that score, for me, he was in the wrong. And if you speak to people in the DA, they too agree. They even qualified by saying he sent an apology to the president after recognizing that he was in the wrong. I think about two other cases in the past that are similar, but not quite. I don't think you can actually compare them, but I'm going to put them out there just so you understand that this has happened before. Our founding father, former President Nelson Mandela, fired Mamwini Madikizela Mandela from his cabinet. Yes, there was a whole host of other transgressions, but you know what else was there? Traveling abroad without authorization. Former President Thabo Mbeki also did the same. He fired Nozizwe Madlala Rutledge. She went to an HIV/AIDS conference in Madrid. Again, different set of circumstances altogether. In Madlala Rutledge's case, it wasn't a personal trip like Mamwini. In this case, there was a difference of opinion around dealing with the virus. Think about it. So she defied him in that regard. She had no authority, no authorization to go, and she went anyway. Came back, I think she went knowing she'd get sacked, and she did it anyway. So there are examples on that score alone. This is not unique. It's happened before in our democracy. Again, completely different set of circumstances. What I understand is that the DA did know that this was coming, at least the federal leader, John Steenhuisen. And there's a back and forth about how much time he'd asked the president to allow for him to manage the news within his own political party. There's also a question that I keep finding about whether or not Whitfield was meant to be fired alone. Was the ex meant to chop him? And possibly Minister of Higher Education, Nobuhle Nkabani. That remains a question for many in the Democratic Alliance who believed that this was meant to happen. In fact, that could be part of the reason why there was such a massive outrage from the DA. As it stands, the DA issued an ultimatum. How do you give a president 48 hours? You don't do that. No president is going to bow to that. So I didn't understand why that happened. I think that tells you about the lack of experience on the DA's part as far as statecraft is concerned, and I think that shouldn't have happened. That 48-hour caveat, I think, was a mistake. So it's a failed ultimatum. Then they come back and say they will not vote for budgets of compromised ANC ministers because the budget votes are currently taking place in Parliament. These include, of course, higher education, human settlement, water and sanitation, and I think the presidency, when you think about Deputy President Paul Mashatile as well as Minister Kumuzin Chabeni, I think presidency is included in that lot. That for me is ineffective, purely because the vote for the budget votes is actually done collectively, and I think it lies with the appropriations bill. I don't think you separate the departments. Yes, they're being debated on and deliberated over as individual departments, but I think it'll almost be inconsequential. I think their objection will be noted, but that's really all that they'll get out of it. So it's almost immaterial. Then there's a national dialogue where the DA then decides that actually they're not going to leave the GNU, they will not participate in the national dialogue. That felt very much like a damn squib to a lot of people who thought when they had their briefing, this would spell the end of the GNU. The thing for me here is interesting because, okay, you don't want to participate in the national dialogue, you don't have to as a political party. It's not set up for political parties. It's set up for us citizens who are aggrieved because we're being told that this thing is going to cost 700 million rand. We have so many problems. The last thing you want to hear is a dialogue is going to require that much money. So already we are irritated. We're frustrated as citizens. But the DA then says that it's not participating in this thing. What's interesting there for me is that government has actually adopted the national dialogue as part of its program. It's the government's program in the 7th administration. So it's not just a thing that's up in the air. It's now part of their work. There's an interministerial committee that the president has set up where different departments must work to see this thing to life. They must bring this thing to life. And Treasury is already looking for money. The money that we're all aggrieved about because honestly, 700 million, but that's part of the conversation that's happening. What's interesting there is agriculture, spearheaded by the federal leader of the DA, is one of the departments that's part of that IMC. So is the DA now telling us because it's not participating in the national dialogue, its federal leader will not be participating? He then needs to go and explain to the president. Otherwise, then John faces the same fate as Andrew Whitfield. It'll be insubordination. So there is something that they need to manage around that, unless because they want to supposedly get kicked out. That's the talk from the DAs, that they don't want to leave. They want to get kicked out of the GNU. Is the setting the president up for that, to fire them via the federal leader? I don't know. We kind of have to, unfortunately, guys, wait that out. My understanding is I think John Steenhuisen likes being in government. I think he's enjoyed his time. I feel like he's somebody who enjoys being around some of his cabinet colleagues. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But there are people in the DA outside of government who definitely want out. And there's this weird wrangling where they feel that the president in moments like this doesn't help them. Because the big question for them is the timing. And in Nkabani, but the timing of it all. Why was it rushed? Why did it take so long to be done? Why did it have to be Whitfield alone? Why now is a question a lot of DA people have said to me. To me, though, it's a question of political expediency. And for me, on both ends, public interest, South African interest, have been sacrificed by both parties at the altar of political expediency. On the DA's side, it is now coming out in public and complaining about that 700 million rand bill attached to the dialogue. You were okay with it until Whitfield was fired? It's also now going to the police about Nkabani. Yes, there was something happening in the committee, but you are not aggressively dealing with this matter. Why? You're going to vote for that budget until Whitfield's firing? So those things for me make me question the DA, and it's not just me. I'm watching how the public is reacting to their current campaign, the political theatrics of it all. The public is not buying into it because of how it's been handled. It's clumsy. 48 hours, as I said, should not have been part and parcel of what they've done. They went wrong there. The clumsiness of all of this has made people also question the DA. Again, I say, everybody, political expediency, they're also now trying to pander to their constituency. I don't know how it'll work. The good thing about the DA is it does gauge the temperature, the sentiment of its base quite frequently. So they will know sooner rather than later how supporters feel about what's happened recently. On the ANC side, I think the president's actions in terms of timing is also about political expediency. People forget that when the budget fallout happened and Action SA voted with the ANC, one of the things that happened at the time is that the ANC had a National Working Committee meeting. They've been trying to push back from sitting and allowing for an NEC to sit, because they know that if the NEC had actually met at the height of the fallout around the budget, right, that NEC would have pushed for the DA to be kicked out of the GNU. That NEC was angry enough. The caucus was upset. The caucus wanted nothing to do with the DA. That's why Fikile Mbabula, Secretary General, whose responsibility it is to convene the NEC, kept pushing it back. There were lots of fights about it. They bought time until Enoch Ondongwana could deliver Budget 3.0. I don't know if they can still manage to do that this time around. That NEC hasn't met for a really long time. So the point that I'm trying to drive you to is when that NWC happened, there were two things that needed to happen. They needed to talk about resetting the GNU, including reading the DA, the Riot Act, and some wanted the DA to lose a ministry. You need to remember that, which suggested then that on the basis of the relationship between the ANC and the DA, the president and his allies' backs were up against the wall in the ANC, that there was pressure ahead of an NEC for them to do something about the DA. They must lose the ministry. So, again, political experience. You need to also play to the gallery in his own party. His back was up against the wall, and there was meant to have been an NEC. The weekend where we had the DA having a media briefing, the ultimatum that was not, the ANC should have actually sat down for an NEC. My suspicion is that the president acted with that in mind, that Whitfield had to be dealt with so that Ramaphosa and his allies could walk into the NEC knowing that they would have done something. They could explain that they couldn't take a ministry, but they would take a deputy minister and try and explain it away. I think it would have backfired because people were hungry, were salivating for a DA minister to lose the position. But I also don't think it was something that's possible. It remains something that cannot be done. Those 6 posts cannot be touched. That's my sentiment, and I think the president knows that. I think he tried to navigate that, so that really is the core of my understanding around it. Just another thing on the president with regards to this back and forth travel and dealing with the US. I don't know if people even realize that Solly Malatsi, the comms minister, was turned back on his way to Taiwan because of South Africa's stance around Taiwan and China. So even that was a point of no return. And the president, from my understanding, made it clear to the DA that should he touch foot in Taiwan, that would have been the end of Solly Malatsi as a minister. The president, from where I stand and what I understand, is very finicky around the issue of foreign policy, is very finicky about US-SA relations. We've seen them at the bottom, at the absolute bottom. So that is an issue. Freedom Front Plus went, but nobody who serves in his government is part of that delegation. So that's neither here nor there. What a political party does, from my understanding, is neither here nor there. So there is also that around the approach to foreign policy. It seems to be a really sore point, no matter how you look at it, right? And then the NWC did meet on Monday. The NWC, for me, attempted to take a posture that tries to make them look more mature than their DA counterparts, so they won't retaliate by not voting for DA ministers and their budgets. Again, I said earlier, it's an immaterial thing to do. It's neither here nor there, so they won't participate in that. They will continue with the dialogue, because the dialogue doesn't belong to political parties. It belongs to us who are aggrieved about that massive price tag attached to it. But they are trying to position themselves as the more mature, more pragmatic part of this battle in the GNU. But what is interesting for me is that they haven't figured out the way forward still on the DA impasse either. Yes, they will not retaliate, they will not be a tit for tat, but the question remains, if you say that there are no problems in the GNU but the DA, how then do you deal with the DA? The attempts to reset the coalition, they started the talks, had endless meetings at hotels, but that particular report, from my understanding, isn't ready. The NWC, I understand, will go forward and meet again on the GNU before the NEC. The NEC is like in a week or two's time, so they've got a tight window to try and manage this. What they're dealing with, I think, also is this fracture between the ANC and the SACP. I think that's a bigger issue for some of the members of the ANC, where an alliance partner has not only said time and again that it wants to go at it alone, but we are moving closer to local government elections. They're doing what they did in Metsimaholo, now in Polokwane, testing the waters with a by-election, and I think the ANC is worried about that. What you're now starting to see, and I suppose it's a sign that the ANC is taking the threat this time around of a SACP that wants to go at it alone seriously, is that they're now chucking out SACP members, those with dual membership, from sitting in ANC election workshops. The question of dual membership is now a greater conversation that they need to deal with in the ANC, in that NEC. So that NEC will definitely deal with GNU, will definitely deal with the DA, but will also have to deliberate over the issue of the SACP. What happens with Nkabani is interesting to me. should be to you as well. Here's a minister who's believed to have lied to Parliament, who has honestly had disdain for Parliament and being held accountable. Has been seen weeks and weeks on end, months on end. She remains in office. That's a problem for all of us. We should all be aggrieved. We should all register that dissatisfaction with the head of state as to why is she still receiving a paycheck from our taxes. That's an issue for me that needs to be resolved. As far as the MKP, I'm not going to talk about them today. I've noted that there are letters flying back and forth. The caucus is divided. A new chief whip is already coming under fire. She's already complained herself with the leader in parliament about the behavior of Ntlamo Londlela as well as Duduzile Zuma. You've heard and you've seen what Floyd Shivambu had to say on that score. Whatever's happening there, I'll talk about it the next time I come back.